And everyone, I just got word from Supervisor Cortese that he's 5 minutes out. So we should start this meeting at 10:05. You can all just hang in there. Everybody, just a little housekeeping as we expect Supervisor Cortese here any minute. The public comment portion of the agenda, item number 2, is the opportunity for anyone to speak about anything not on today's agenda. So if anyone wishes to do that, we've got Dave, we've got cards in the back. Oh, we have cards in the back, or they're up here in the front. Okay, so we have cards up here in the front. Doug, I know you know the system. If anybody wants to fill out a card, please do so here and submit it in the box next to their clerk will pick it up and will recognize you at the appropriate time. Anyone wishing to speak about consent items, which are currently 10 through 16, we're going to approve those, I would imagine, as we usually do, in one motion. So if anybody wants to speak on any of those items, also submit a card and we'll pull that item. Our policy here is if you want to speak on multiple consent items, that we allow for the 3 minutes total to speak on consent items. And I'll give you a little heads up. I'm going to suggest that we also put 4, 7, and 9 on consent today. So anybody wishing to speak on those items, please submit a card as well.
Good morning and welcome to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors Housing, Land Use, Environment, and Transportation Committee meeting of November 15, 2018. We are beyond 10 o'clock. I apologize for being here a few minutes late to get started, but we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I know Supervisor Wasserman has already explained some of the ground rules for public comment and so forth. So we will actually just jump right into introductions. I assume those haven't been done yet. And maybe we could start with Mr. Mitra this time and just move from left to right on the dais so everyone knows who's up here.
Steve Mitra, Assistant County Counsel.
Gary Hersig, Deputy County Executive.
Dave Cortese, County Supervisor.
Kirk Gerard, Director of Planning and Development.
I'm Harry Freitas. I'm the Director of Roads and Airports Department.
Joe Zintek, Director, Consumer and Environmental Protection Agency.
Eric Goodrich, Interim Financial Administrative Services Manager with Parks, and I'm sitting in for Don Rocha. And also I wanted to add Deputy Director Janet Hawks will be switching chairs with me here in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. For purposes of the record and the clerk, that does establish a quorum since both of the voting members are here. And that allows us to move right into public comment. We have one request for public comment. That's from Scott Largent. Scott, you can come on up and of the usual 3 minutes. Are you still holding your speaker card? Just come on up and introduce yourself. We'll get the speaker card from you when you're up here. This is general public comment on items not on the agenda. When we get to the agenda items, we'll call them individually.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Scott Largent. I do appreciate, I understand people run late and don't take this the wrong way. I just really appreciate being able to have both of the supervisors when we do public comment, and I do appreciate you guys waiting until everybody was here. What I've noticed sometimes is at the health and hospitals run, if one of the supervisors is running late, they kind of push the public comment thing, and sometimes I'm here to talk to the public and also to both of you, so I do appreciate that. I put another video up online. It's not public until probably in about another hour, and it's the woman that I was talking about that lost her property at St. James Park during an arrest. It's a powerful video. It has our sheriff's department involved in the stop there. And when we went over and we asked that gentleman in the car there, we let him know that the property was being taken. No one had responded, so they kind of kept saying, yeah, somebody's on their way. They're going to protect this woman's property rights. It just didn't happen. So what I'm trying to figure out is what type of damage control do we do for this woman? We have now left her stuff for people just to ransack. And when I first looked at her stuff, it wasn't the best, iPad device. It was probably a Samsung. It was still her device. It was still her cell phone. It was still her belongings. It was still her pictures. Do we get her stuff back that has been stolen? Do we get her a new piece of luggage? Do we get her some type of tablet? What do we do? Because she's sitting in jail. She's innocent until proven guilty. I know nothing about this woman, just that they had a free-for-all flea market with her property there. So I guess I'm really confused. I understand how it takes a long time if this woman files something with the county, if she begs the public defender's office to fight for her property. You guys see what will happen. She'll get stuck in that county go-round. She'll be begging and begging and begging. Now, if she complains enough, and let's say I get her to come in here, what that will trigger is they won't defend her through the public defender's office. They'll declare a conflict of interest because, remember, now she's complaining. Her rights have been violated. They'll bump her to the IDO. They'll play puppet with her. They'll send her in circles like somebody with a glad bag over their head trying to find their property. That's what we're going to do with this woman. How do we speed up the process to get her compensated for her belongings? She's going to probably get out of jail with nothing. And what are we going to do? Just put her on that list of people that are going to be dying? Are we going to put her on that list of the 290 that died in Santa Clara County last year? She's more likely going to die out at that park. Sleeping bags, stove, all that other stuff is just never accounted for. I'm talking about what was in her luggage. The other stuff is a free-for-all. So I appreciate you paying attention, Mike. And same with you, Dave. The rest of you are worthless.
Okay, thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments. That, I believe, concludes public comment. Again, if you've filled one of these out, please turn it in so that we can call you for any speakers on individual items. We have one more speaker so far, or speaker card, but that's for agenda item number 8. And we now have one for item 6 as well. So we'll get to those as we get to the items. Okay, Supervisor Wasserman, that brings us to item 3, which is approval of the consent calendar and changes to the committee agenda.
Yes.
And I have read the report on number 4. It's obviously pretty straightforward and simple at this point. 5, I have a comment on, but I believe it could be put on consent anyway. And then 9, I would be agreeable to putting on consent if you are. So I don't know if you're interested in adding any of those items. Just want to give you what my sentiments are on 4, 5, and 9.
Thank you. I'd be happy to add those. I'd also suggest that you consider item number 7. And I understand that you wanted to hold item number 16.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I don't know that's so much my hold. I think there was a glitch in putting the agenda together, and I should probably look to Mr. Frey to see if he's familiar with that. We actually got word as we were putting the agenda together that 16 would likely be held over to the next meeting, but it showed up on here anyway. So I know the clerk's aware of all that as well. So we could be just play it safe, rather safe than sorry, and just carry it for 1 month.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I was remiss in not addressing that earlier. We would appreciate that opportunity to bump it a month. We had a glitch. That's the best way to describe it.
All right, so on item 16, that'll be held to the next regularly scheduled meeting of Hewlett. Item,
I think we have 4, 5, 7, and 9, Supervisor.
yeah, I'm taking a look at 7 because I hadn't considered that one earlier. Give me a moment, and then we'll let you know
Sure.
what I need to know about that, if anything more.
Oh,
All right, let's go ahead and I do have the report. We have some more questions that we can ask off agenda on 7. And we'll go ahead and add 7 as well. So the consent calendar,
I'm sorry, and I know you wanted to make a comment on one of the items we're putting on consent. I also had a comment to make on item 5 and item 9.
okay, and let's see if we can get something that sounds like a formal motion so everyone knows which ones are on there, and then I'll defer to you on your comment.
Sure, would you like me to make the
My
motion?
comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I would suggest that we add items 4, 5, 7, and 9 to the existing consent calendar, which includes 10 through 16, but also that we hold number 16. I have a comment I would like to make regarding 9 and 5 when you feel that's appropriate.
Okay, the motion is seconded, so that would be appropriate now.
Thank you. I'm going to blame my morning cough on the smoke out there. All right. As far as item number 5 on page 8, the first paragraph, the last sentence says such as developmental disabilities, and I would suggest that instead of restricting it to developmental disabilities, since there are numerous types of disabilities, we replace the words developmental disability with serious disabling conditions. And that's on package page 8 right here, and it's that last sentence on number 1.
And you want the words to be, just say one more time what you want the
I'd like
words
to replace developmental disability, since that's limiting, to serious disabling conditions, which would be all-inclusive.
Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Let's include that in the
Thank you.
item, even though it's staying on consent. I just want to say as to my concurrence with item 5 going on consent, what that would not include is the positions outlined in 9H and item 13. Those are both on page 5 of the actual legislative policies report.
I'm looking at them.
And those are both having to do directly or indirectly with cannabis and state legislation on that. So I want to, on the basis of my past votes and also on the basis that I think it's premature for us to declare particularly state legislation trying to take control of this issue as a problem without having seen it first. I don't know what they're going to produce. I think we've been sitting here in the committee saying, let's see what they produce before we do anything else. So I don't want to take a position ahead of time that says we disagree with whatever they're going to come up with it as to do with local control. So that's just my position. It isn't, I'm not asking to change it. I just want to make sure my concurrence with everything else in here does not include those two items.
Thank you.
That's all.
And
I
one
just
more
wanna explain
addition
why.
on this same item, just two below what you just mentioned, Supervisor, item number 11.
Yeah.
A question I have through you as the chair to our council, Steve. It talks about funding and policies that promote the economic development of Alviso. And knowing Alviso, a community such as Willow Glen, Almaden, et cetera, I was wondering about replacing the word Alviso with unincorporated areas to be all-inclusive, because I think Alviso is actually in the incorporated area of San Jose. And I think our intent was more county-related. Wondered what you thought about that. So,
I would be more comfortable just adding unincorporated areas to
Okay.
Alviso, and even if we add a parentheses there that says City of San Jose to make that clear, and then unincorporated areas. The reason is because we have taken an active role in the past. I know that particularly because it's in my district, in endorsing studies, including Chamber of Commerce studies and other studies, because of our involvement out there with the marina and so forth, in terms of trying to promote placemaking out there surrounding county assets. So I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. I'm not sure that it would be a problem taking it out, but I don't want someone to say it's not included. You know, if we have to go back to our state lobbyists, our federal lobbyists, and ask for help with grants or something like that, that's really why it's been in there, because we have done that in the past, tried to secure grant opportunities at a federal and state level.
thank you. And through the chair to Steve. Steve, the reason I was bringing it up was where we called out Alviso, and I don't know exactly what you call. I used to kid my chief of staff, John Gibbs, about Willow Glen, where it's really, it's an area. It's not an incorporated city. Alviso is actually part of incorporated San Jose. And here at the county, I just wanted to make sure when we're talking about Alviso, it's the same way we talk about Willow Glen. It's the same way we talk about Almaden, where these are areas that have self-designated, if you will, as communities. But I just wanted to make sure that our priorities were towards county issues rather than the city of San Jose.
So it would be helpful if there's agreement among the policy committee members to propose the exact addition and where, so that staff has that direction.
You know, what we could also do, because this gets forwarded to the Board of Supervisors for the overall discussion, and there almost always is a discussion there, that we just indicate that we're sending 11 up to the board, knowing, with a committee recommendation that there be some additional wordsmithing there and consideration by the board, because I do think it's a complex issue. And I'll just throw one more thing out, not to debate the issue here, because we're just trying to deal with the consent calendar. But, for example, I think it'd be worthwhile having a little bit of a discussion at the board level on economic development, what we do want our role to be incorporated or unincorporated. I think you raise an interesting issue. And, for example, because of RDA agreements that we've had over the years in the Diridon area of downtown San Jose, we've always taken a posture of being very much pro-development down there, pro-economic development, pretty overtly. So I do think the language is important, and
Good idea.
I understand what you're saying is we're not trying to come back over and take over city land use jurisdiction. At the same time, there's probably some language there that support local agency proactive land use decisions that
Sounds good to me.
you know, something along those lines. our office can both work on that individually on the way to the board, so we have maybe a nice, tight, crisp discussion about it there.
Thank you. And I have a 30-second comment to make about item number 9,
Yes,
if now is appropriate.
Item, not on this,
No, agenda item 9.
agenda item 9.
Yes.
Please.
Regarding the renewables, I just want to give a big shout out to all those involved with the development, the maintenance of, et cetera. The renewables that the county produces have now earned almost $2 million in PG&E credits. And I just want to say thank you, great job, kudos to all involved.
Yeah, likewise. That's been a big success story all the way through. So,
Thank you.
so I think back to our consent calendar, you have the rundown on what's on consent. We just made some comments on item 5 before allowing it to go forward on consent. We probably could have just left it off consent, but what's done is done. And the clerk's giving me the nod of the head that he understands where we're at on the consent calendar. So having had that discussion, there's no dissent on that final consent calendar for the committee, so it does go forward unanimously with the comments attached to it that we made. Okay, so item 6 is asking us to consider recommendations from the Department of Planning and Development relating to participation in a regional housing needs allocation sub-region, or arena sub-region, as some people would call it. And there's 2 possible actions here: receiving the report, which is standard fare, and 6B is a possible action, forward recommendation of the Board of Supervisors relating to adoption of a resolution of intent to support formation and participation in such a sub-region. So I'll turn it over to Kurt.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Cortese. Rob Eastwood, our planning manager, is going to provide our report.
Good morning, Rob Eastwood, planning manager. What's before you today is a report on the RENA sub-region and to request forward of a resolution to the Board of Supervisors to participate in the RENA sub-region. RENA sub-region was one of the top recommendation items for affordable housing in the region from the 2017 Housing Task Force. In 2017, one of the board members was appointed to a subcommittee that was initiated by the Cities Association to look into creating a sub-region. That subcommittee has been working on the formation of a sub-region, and in October of this year, the Cities Association voted to go forward and create the sub-region. They did forward to the 15 cities in the county and the county a resolution of intent to participate with some supporting materials related to how the sub-region would be created, formed, and how it would be managed. That's in your packet today. The request is to receive the report, forward to the board a resolution which would indicate the county's intent to participate. Under state law, the sub-region can only be created if the county does participate. It is an alternative way of looking at affordable housing. The normal means of the county addressing affordable housing in its housing element is to receive an allocation through the state and ABAG. And as an alternative approach, a county and a collection of cities can create a sub-region in which it receives an allocated regional housing needs allocation together, and then can decide as a group how to allocate those housing needs between each participant. So this is a new approach. This is an opportunity for the county to discuss how Measure A funds are dispersed, look at creative and new possibilities of supporting affordable housing. A sub-region has been used with 3 other counties in the Bay Area, Napa, Solano, and San Mateo. They're a bit different. Those are characterized by smaller cities. As you know, in this county, we have 1 city which takes up about half of the population, and then the other 14 cities are much smaller. So the dynamics are a bit different. But in terms of the opportunities it presents for looking at affordable housing and the potential for the county to be a leader and collaborator in encouraging housing within the cities, the administration thinks this is a potential opportunity. So with that, I'll conclude my report here, available for any questions. Have talked to the executive director of the Cities Association. I'm not sure if she's in the audience today, but the indicator was if the county was to initiate its support to forward to the Cities Association. I think there's still questions ahead on the assimilation documents, if that's an MOU or an ad hoc JPA, and the funding that would go with it. But there's still time the subregion would have to be formed by the end of 2020. So that would be the next steps. Thanks.
Right. So before we hear the speaker, just to clarify, this action today, I mean, what it says it is just to move forward a resolution of intent to support formation and participation, with the formation to come later. Is that basically what you're saying, that the actual form of the entity and rules of engagement haven't been finalized yet? That would come back.
That's correct.
Later.
Yeah, you do have in your packet proposed bylaws, but today the subregion proposal is a subcommittee of the Cities Association. The county's not a member of the Cities Association. We know I think once the Cities Association subcommittee knows all intended participating members, it'd have to come back with an MOU or some sort of assimilation document that creates the
Right.
county's participation.
Right. But in this case, as you said, the county is included by statute. It's required if it's going to go forward. And I know that we actively participate in the Cities Association meetings through a county executive's office primarily now, although we're not voting members. So appreciate all that clarity. I just wanted to make sure we understand how much this resolution would bind us or anybody else for that matter as we go forward. So let's call on Andy Jordan from Cities Association of Santa Clara County. I think is the only public speaker on 6, but if anyone else would like to speak on item 6, now is the time. Hi.
Hi, I'm Andy Jordan. I'm the Executive Director of the Cities Association, so thank you very much for having me and considering this today. I think that I'm here to answer any of your questions, but I would just like to comment on the point of that you're not a member of the Cities Association and how we view our bylaws. Our bylaws state that we can create a committee, and we also have the committee that we're appointing and the bylaws that we're proposing for the subregion allow the committee to work without being the oversight of the board of the directors. So we would be granting the county a vote according to the bylaws, and everybody would have an equal vote. I think it's important to note that the subregion, really it comes down to everybody has autonomy and can say no to a trade or a share. I mean, both jurisdictions, if there is a trade, the jurisdictions have to both agree to it. So look, right now we're looking for intent. We would be asking your board to pass the resolution so that we can begin moving forward. Also, when the committee looked at the other subregions, we wanted to take the least cumbersome approach and try to utilize the organizations that we already had set up, and that's why the Cities Association, there's 15 of the 16 participants right there. But it's meant to be a very collaborative effort. We also talked to CCAG. CCAG said that it wasn't an expensive effort, that it was somebody organizing a meeting. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here. So I just want to say both Supervisor Wasserman and I have served on the Cities Association when we were elected members of municipal government. In fact, we served together. I don't remember.
Many years ago.
Yeah. So we're quite familiar with, with the practices of the Cities Association, what it's there for, how things happen, how appointees are made and how appointments are made to regional entities and so forth. I know that the original referral, meaning the idea to pursue this, was actually referred by the Board of Supervisors to the Cities Association, asking the Cities Association to take up this discussion because there were members of the board that felt that it might be a good idea, and for a lot of the reasons that our planning department has already indicated, the idea of that we were moving in the direction of a lot of self-help in terms of funding housing, and that there was going to need to be discussion among the cities as to who's doing what in terms of taking advantage of the funding, Measure A particularly now, but and the idea that we do have one big city and 14 other cities that make up the other half of the county, population-wise and governance-wise, that don't always see eye to eye on housing issues. And it's very, very, having been the past president of ABAG and served on it now for 18 years, it's very difficult to have those conversations with 101 cities all at once when you're trying to focus on what's good for Santa Clara County. So it seems like there's a lot of good reasons to do this. I don't know that if I have any questions for you specifically. I know you said something about the bylaws, meaning the Cities Association bylaws, and I guess depending on entity formation and who's in charge of what, and what role the Cities Association itself would actually play versus a JPA or something like that, it would be interesting for us to know after the Board of Supervisors adopts a resolution of intent, the answers to those questions in terms of bylaws.
There are draft bylaws for the sub-region. Were they not included in your packet? They are there. And the idea is that everybody would have one vote. And just San Jose did participate in the sub-region, so that the one vote they were fine with.
But the Cities Association's drafted bylaws, have they been endorsed by all of the cities?
They are being endorsed by all of the cities right now. And so far, we've had about all of the cities have. Cupertino has not indicated that they are on board yet. Sunnyvale is in support of the idea. The rest of the cities have all said that they are on board, and they're now all endorsing taking action.
Yeah. So I mean, my only, I don't know if the resolution of intent. Maybe I could ask Steve Mitra. I was trying to have that conversation as a sidebar here, but whether or not the resolution of intent, when the board takes that up, obviously the committee doesn't bind the county to anything. It's just a recommendation of the board. But when the board takes that up, would if we adopt the resolution of intent as submitted, identical to the package that's before us today, would it then also bind us to the bylaws at that point, or would the formation documents, which would have to come back to the county later, so that we could take the action to actually join the entity, would that be the opportunity for us to say, would that be the final opportunity for us to say, we agree with everything? I guess what I'm trying to make sure we know that ahead of time before we get to the board, whenever that is in the next couple of weeks, as we'll go to the board, I assume.
Yeah, I don't see, in terms of the operative portion of the resolution, adoption of the bylaws, and maybe you can confirm, because it's your draft template resolution, whether the intent was that the bylaws would also come as a package as part of the resolution or not.
So I believe that when the group sits together at the first time, the policymakers, the electeds, when they come together, they would adopt the bylaws. But in order to do that, your body would need to be okay with the bylaws so that that person can vote at the first meet when we organize.
Okay, so to be clear, if you present bylaws that have been endorsed by all the cities, it's at that point it's a difficult matter to then go back and edit them to get them adopted again. So just so we know the ground rules, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, but I think it's important to understand that if that's how, if well, it isn't a majority yet, but it sounds like almost half the cities have already adopted a resolution. Based on what you're saying, I don't want to recharacterize or mischaracterize your testimony. But
13 have said yes, they're on board, and now they're voting and taking formal action. And so of those, 5 or 6 have already taken action. But I expect 13 of the cities at least.
Okay, So just a point here is sort of, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because this is a committee meeting. So just to be absolutely clear, until this comes before our board and the full board takes action, which may or may not include suggested modifications to the bylaws or anything else, our board hasn't taken that issue up. So it's just full disclosure here.
So the
It's
bylaws are
possible.
expected to be that.
It's
But
if the
yes.
bylaws have to be endorsed at exactly the same time as the resolution, then because you're trying to get aligned with all the other cities, and the county's indispensable to this by state law, you could have the problem of some majority combination of the Board of Supervisors saying, hey, there's one thing in these bylaws that we need changed. So that isn't necessarily Supervisor Wasserman and I right now. We're not making that comment. It's just a process issue perhaps, and it may be a non-issue. It may come through, no one says anything, no one modifies anything, no one recommends anything different, but we just want you to know that,
Yeah,
because I don't want to
I
get
completely
blamed later
understand.
for, hey, we thought everything was cool at the committee, and then we got to the Board of Supervisors, and we got all jammed up, and now we have to go all the way back to these other cities, because I imagine
And then
if I was
the
at the
next,
cities
the other
association,
opportunity to change would be at the first meeting, because then the board has to, that committee would have to adopt it, and that's how we're dealing with the roundtable as well, with the aircraft noise issue, because we had to do the same thing.
but anyway, it's just.
I understand.
Yeah, it's we understand your rules of engagement, and it's just important. I just don't want to get a bunch of calls from, Mayor Hendricks or anyone else, all great people, but saying, hey, you guys, misdirected us here, and you got to the Board of Supervisors, you made changes, and we've already adopted this, as cities. So the most important vote we probably will make on this whole thing, besides just the endorsement of it itself, is what the bylaws look like, because we're only going to have 1 of 15 votes later. And so I think the board's going to be fully engaged on whether or not the bylaws are appropriate, and hopefully they are. We're here in the spirit of collaboration, but that remains to be seen. That's all. And with that, with that disclaimer, I'm ready to move it forward, have that discussion, and make sure we get a final vote out of the board to keep moving. Because I do want to emphasize, I think I'm really glad that the Cities Association has, taken the bull by the horns, moved this forward, and is at least that many cities are already on board. That's all really good news, and I think we should be on board as well. I just think there's that possibility for a glitch somewhere between now and when the board adopts it. That's all. Supervisor?
Thank you. I just have a quick comment to make. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for putting this all together and to getting the 15 cities to collaborate. I understand it's positive news on Sunnyvale. They just need to vote, and hopefully Cupertino will come along as well. I think it's a great idea, and I think the comment you made about kind of willing buyer, willing seller, having the 1-and-1 where they both agree as far as how to address housing needs in their specific areas. It's my understanding, and my understanding from staff, that you will facilitate the committees, no JPAs necessary.
That is what our committee believed,
Your
and we
opinion?
were working with ABAG as
Wonderful.
well.
I'm all in favor of fewer committees, fewer JPAs, whatever government simplification we can. So thank you for doing all the work and getting all the other parties together. And I, too, am in favor of it. And Supervisor, if that was a motion that you made to receive the report and to forward the recommendations to the board, I'll second that, or I'll make the motion, whichever you prefer.
Why don't we just say there's no dissent and it's moved unanimously? How's that? You can be the maker of the motion because you just stated it.
Okay, and we're moving it favorably?
Yeah, just with the caveat that the bylaws will be subject to review by the full Board of Supervisors, as will be the resolution itself. But we're moving it forward for final deliberation by the board. Is that
Super.
fair?
That's a good motion.
Okay. So that is adopted without dissent, and that brings us to item 8. Item 7 was placed on consent. Thank you very much again for, particularly the Office of Sustainability, for putting that together. And item 8 is the follow-up on the Alviso Dock feasibility study review phase 2.
Thank you, Supervisor Cortese. I'd like to introduce Annie Thompson. Annie's our Interim Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Construction Services.
We have 3 speakers. I just want the speakers to know that I have your cards, and as soon as we have an initial presentation, we'll call the speakers up.
Am I on? Yes. Good morning, Supervisors. Annie Thompson, Acting Deputy Director for the Department of Parks and Recreation. I have with me John Folkowski, the Acting Principal Planner. And I think we've provided a pretty thorough report. I can additionally go quickly through the presentation if you'd like, or we can simply field questions related to the report, whichever you prefer.
I think if you just give us the high points of the report, I've looked at it, but I'd like to hear your perspective. So I know I'm not missing something, which I may be, that you consider to be, a key element of the report.
Okay, sure. Is there the clicker? Just to help myself with a couple of visuals, since I'm a visual person, I'll pop through 1 or 2 slides. Okay, so I think the high points are, that the work that we've carried out thus far has been in 2 phases for our feasibility study to look at the potential of developing public access at the dock facility at the South Bay Yacht Club in Alviso Slough. The first phase of our work was just based on existing information that was available. And the second phase of our work was a bathymetric survey. We came to Hewlett at that time and found that a little bit more information could better flesh out the picture we were painting there, and that's why we wanted to come back today. I do want to point out that our work is based on, especially in phase 1, on other similar work that has been carried out to study the expansion of access in Alviso Slough. And there are a variety of challenges that are not noted in this most recent report. Previous efforts include San Francisco Bay Emergency Port Access Study and the Santa Clara Valley Water District Alviso Slough Restoration Project. And those previous efforts were found to be relatively infeasible for a variety of reasons, but that's not really what we focused on in this last round. So this last round is really to better illustrate the bathymetric conditions in the slough and how that relates to tides and vessel access. So in essence, I would say this is a very practical look at access in Alviso Slough. So basically what we did in the last time we came to Hewlett, we offered a potential model for boating access that was based on the Department of Boating and Waterways recommendations, and those are just recommendations. What they would have recommended for this kind of a site would be a negative 6.8 foot mean lower low water depth and a 75 foot width. We based our recommendations or our study on something slightly less than that, which is only a 50 foot width. And we presented those numbers to you. What we understood that would maybe be helpful would be a slightly lesser version. And so our most recent report illustrates that with a negative 4 foot mean lower low water depth, so slightly less dredging. So we've provided for you the cost estimates broken down so that you see the cost of the dock itself. That's seen on this slide in the subtotal line, subtotal of dock and landside amenities, as if that were the only thing you did. And then looking at the dredging in the area of the dock and what that cost add would be depending on what depth you went to.
So can you stop right there for a minute?
Sure.
Just because that's an important point, I think, in terms of our questions, my office's questions. So if the direction at some point were, let's just go back to this original thought of moving the dock, making the dock's capacity useful again by moving things around, that would be this cost that you're calling dock dredging only. I don't understand. It seems on the chart like it's blended with the dredging of the slough as well, because you still have the point, the -4 feet and the -6.8 feet.
Okay.
One of the things we clearly asked for last time was, can we also just get the simple, answer to the question, what happens if we do no slough dredging at all, but just, open up the dock again?
Right, so that is embedded in what you're looking at. So to be clear, this table provides the comparison of costs just in the area of the dock. So if you imagine the bottom part that says dredging and below is not there, the subtotal of dock and landside amenities is the same in the column of -4 and -6.8. So the total cost of just the dock would be about $4.5 million. What we found in our work, though, is that to allow boats to, safely pass and moor, et cetera, some dredging in the area of the dock would be best at minimum. And so we've offered two options for that. So this table is just looking at the area of the dock. The next table talks about dredging in the slough. And so that adds in, if you look at the lines closely, the slough channel dredging costs, which brings the two potential totals to $12.3 million or $21.3 million, give or take.
So again, let me interrupt just to say, the caption at the top of 4 feet or 6.8 feet is because the recommendation is consistent depth at both the dock and the slough in either case. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Whether you dredge the slough or the dock or both, the recommendation is to have exactly the same depth.
Well, there's no exact recommendation. I think the choice of how much dredging would occur is somewhat subjective, but
I'm only, and so again, I don't want to interrupt your cadence, but the original request by referral was, what would it take to move the dock to the deeper water, not what would it take to dredge the existing dock. And I made that clear last time, but I'm not sure that question has actually been answered yet.
So I think it's in the previous table that we just looked at. So to move the dock into deeper water, into the nearer the center of the channel, you would need to dredge.
And why is that?
Because, so let's look at the graphic that we provided. So in the next slide, for the size of vessel that was proposed as part of the, conceptual scenario of this dock, it would be a maximum boat length of 35 feet, assuming it's using the yacht club. It could potentially be a sailboat. The draft of a sailboat varies, but let's say an average is about 5 feet. So with the existing conditions in the area, if you go to a -4 foot scenario, there's a lot of running aground that would occur. At the -6.8, you have no restriction whatsoever depending on tidal conditions, and that's what our next slide really illustrates well.
And can you just go back to that slide, though, just so I can get clear? So the area adjacent to the existing dock, South Bay Yacht Club dock, is at what depth now? I see the graphic that says, well, if you have -1.8 low tide, 4 and 6.8. So I'm seeing that visually. But what is that existing? What's existing condition?
So it varies, and I don't know the exact depth in that particular location because the bottom, that's why this graphic shows you the bottom of the slough is undulating. So there are high points and low points throughout the area around the dock and throughout the entire slough, which in our second feasibility study that we brought was shown in some of the maps where we had sort of a red to blue gradient, red being places that were high. So the dredging isn't just to take one elevation to another elevation, it's to chop down the varying high points to a...
Let's just smooth it out.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Please proceed.
And then you get a width and a radius that you need so that boats can pass each other and turn, which is particularly important in an area where they're pulling into more adjacent to the dock. So this kind of illustrates why, obviously a small vessel like a kayak has no issue regardless. Most of the kind of boats that are using our existing marina facility don't have too much issue because they have very little draft, whereas anything with much more is going to run into challenges. That could even include power boats as well. So this, I think, really paints the picture the most clearly when you look at the tides that we have in Alviso Slough itself. So the idea with the negative 6.8 mean lower low water scenario was to provide 100% access to anybody who has like a 5-foot draft. If you do a -4 mean lower low water, you lose a remarkable amount of access based on tides. So that was what we really wanted to show here. The percent of days that are affected throughout the year would essentially be none if you were to dredge to -6.8 versus -4.0. So we just really wanted to illustrate the usefulness and why that it was the recommended scenario from the Department of Boating and Waterways. So that's really the information we came to share today, as well as you saw in those previous tables, those broken down costs that you requested, so you sort of have the menu of options.
Okay, appreciate that.
And I think we've covered everything else, so I can take any other questions if you need.
Just where I'm kind of headed on this, Supervisor Wasserman, is I want to hear from the public speakers, of course, next. I have one quick question, but I think where I'm headed on this is to accept the follow-up report and take it under advisement at this point. But we'll hear if for some reason there's something compelling that comes out of public comment that moves us to do something more immediate than consider taking all this information under consideration, because there's budget implications and of a magnitude that if the county were going to get involved in an investment, it would come at a different time of the year than this, just in terms of our budget cycle. That said, the question I have is, and this is really kind of a pre-response to a letter that came in, and maybe one of the speakers will be speaking to that, with regard to where the siltation and the sedimentation is coming from. And really the argument was made that, it's come from the previous construction of levees in what is now the Don Edwards Wildlife Refuge, which essentially would argue that somehow sedimentation has backed in, from the larger slough in the bay. And this maybe goes beyond, your presentation today, the scope, but it may be something I want to look into further. My experience, especially having served on the San Jose City Council for 8 years, where we had jurisdiction of much of the area around the entire, the drainage, the valley's riparian drainage, is that dredging is going on pretty constantly now, particularly from East Foothills riparian corridors all the way down almost to this point, including, obviously there was tremendous dredging done in the Guadalupe River to get it to where it is, and box culverts built and so forth. It's presentations that we receive on the City Council, particularly from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, indicated that sedimentation was moving this way because of increased flows that were created by development adjacent to riparian corridors. Thompson Creek, Lower Silver Creek, Coyote Creek, all those tributaries are now have increased flows during normal years, rainfall years. And the sedimentation is coming from the embankments of those creeks, which now are running at a much higher level. We certainly saw that with the floods a couple of years ago, or whenever that was exactly. And that drives sedimentation downstream, and it starts to settle. It settles, all the way along. But somehow when we get to this point, it seems like the argument is that the sedimentation doesn't come from that direction. It comes from the bay itself, so therefore it's somehow, you know, a more natural, less development-related process. Does this study ever get into the notion of where is sedimentation coming from and how long it will continue and what the end impact of that is? I mean, are we headed to a future where at some point there's this entire slough from what we now call the South Bay Yacht Club to the county marina is essentially just all filled in with sedimentation?
So
This obviously wasn't here in decades past. I mean, that part is very clearly outlined in the report, but it came from somewhere. I'm just trying to figure out where it's coming from. Would dredging here be an attempt to reverse development impact like it is upstream in the rest of the valley, or would dredging here be interfering with a natural process that's occurring, that this slough is just destined by nature to be not a slough eventually? It's going to be full of sedimentation.
yeah, I think that's beyond my level of expertise, as much as I've gained expertise that I never thought I would have about Alviso Slough during this process. I do know that USGS has been studying the bathymetry of the slough, particularly related to the notch that was cut in Pond A8. And my understanding is that additionally affects sedimentation, particularly at this site, and it seems to be inconclusive as of now how that notch is affecting this site in particular, not necessarily the whole slough, but particularly the dock. But I can say that there are a variety of other issues that we've seen other projects run into that any project in Alviso Slough would face in a way that dredging up channel wouldn't. And so, for example, in the previous proposal by Santa Clara Valley Water District to do a restoration of Alviso Slough, the Regional Water Quality Control Board essentially said, we won't permit dredging here. And other agencies have been very, concerned about the potential for dredging, particularly because there are other potential impacts to the environment that might occur. Habitat impacts to the slough edges, to the habitat that's right on the fringe, especially in vegetation for special or particular wildlife. And there's always the potential that dredging would drive up mercury levels, not obviously meaning to, but these are all the unknowns, and I think it's just the nature of the salt ponds and the whole South Bay. It's very complex, and I don't think there are clear answers on which way sedimentation is coming or going.
I think the politics are complex, and I think the South Bay has been, our area here, our county has been particularly discouraged by regional agencies from doing things that are done all over the rest of the region. There's a Warriors Stadium that's being concluded right on the bay, and BCDC's recommendation was not to let that go forward, but the votes on the commission were let that go forward. So there wouldn't be any progress whatsoever around the bay, and I consider myself an environmentalist, but if you just said anywhere that you're going to have any kind of habitat impact or environmental impact is a no-go. I mean, even our habitat protection, our habitat conservation plan, which I know Parks is very familiar with, wouldn't be necessary, because there would be basically everything would just be a go, no-go decision. It wouldn't be about how do you mitigate impact. It would be about if there is impact, then you just don't do anything. And I don't think upstream that there's any less, coho salmon trying to move upstream. I don't think there's any less protected species upstream. I can certainly speak to that in the jurisdictions that I've represented as an elected official. But I think when, homes are going to be threatened by flood project, by floods, that all of a sudden a flood control project, takes precedence over habitat impact, and we figure out how to mitigate habitat impact. We say, look, we can't have people's homes being flooded. We're going to do a project. There's one plan right now along Coyote Creek in the Center Road area of San Jose, which is designed to make sure that the flooding that happened recently doesn't happen again. And again, there's absolutely no question that habitat, flora, fauna are all going to be impacted there by that project. So that isn't directed at you. I'm just giving you my opinion as to what's the real problem. How much of it is, can we mitigate impacts, and how much of it is just the politics of, well, this is the South Bay. You're not going to see them get the same kind of opportunities, to develop recreational opportunities and economic opportunities that San Francisco gets, that Oakland gets along the East Bay, that Union City gets along the East Bay, that even Marin gets, for that example. So I think that's work that we have to do, politically. That's why I think the work is done here now, and I want to when I say take it under advisement, is to figure out, what the possibilities are of, advancing this kind of work. What I've heard from some federal officials, including the Army Corps of Engineers, is that they favor anything down here in this Alviso area that is going to legitimately increase recreational use of the Don Edwards Wildlife Refuge. And I think that's really what we're trying to focus on here. Do we have an opportunity to create, let people take advantage of a huge federal investment that's been made out there, or do we want them landlocked, basically? That to me is a fundamental question, and it's the only reason I've been, pursuing this on my end. So, but anyway, thank you. And if you have any further response, I wasn't trying to have the last word there. I just wanted you to know why I was asking those questions.
Yeah, I think I totally understand. It's a very complex series of issues in that area, and the sedimentation one is hard to answer, even for people that are much greater experts than me.
Right.
So I think even different agencies differ on that response.
And I'm impressed by your expertise and the thoroughness of the report. Thank you for that. Supervisor Wasserman?
I understand you have a couple more speaker cards.
Yes, we do.
We'll hear from them, and I had a couple of comments.
All right.
Questions?
So we have Eileen McLaughlin, Shani Kleinhaus, and Roy Hayes. And you can come up in any order, and you have a couple minutes each to speak, which is our custom on these items.
Good morning, Chair Cortese and Vice Chair Wasserman. I'm Eileen McLaughlin. I represent the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. We submitted a letter that I don't know if you've had a chance to look at, but we covered a lot of topics here. This project is really paddling against the current, and the current's getting stronger. Excuse my analogy there, but I couldn't resist. We've got a situation here where the natural conditions cause us to agree with the findings of the latest report. It is substantial that the dredging is necessary. That we're talking about a project which is just for up to 15 boats, 15 boat owners that would be served expanding this dock. So we have to look at what is it that we're fighting upstream. This is likely to have its permits, highly likely to have its permits denied. It's rare that permits are denied. On the Water District's project, they put an EIR out, a draft EIR in 2008. They had a final EIR in 2009, and the final denials from the Corps of Engineers and BCDC were 2014. Normally, the agencies work with the proponent to try to adjust the project so that permits can be issued. And all that time, they were not. This is a very similar project and faces the same domain. And it's, in this case, in comment, Chair Cortese mentioned the political things. This was not done at a political level. There's extraordinary environmental impacts. The feasibility study did not have the time or capacity, perhaps, to talk to the primary sources of that information, the Don Edwards Refuge and the Salt Pond Restoration Project. So thank you for listening, and we
And
hope
we
that
do-
you just put this aside.
Thank you for being here. We do have the letter as part of the packet, so it's part of the record. So we have all your comments and thoughts, I think. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Shani Kleinhaus. I'm the environmental advocate for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I've been in this job for about 9 years, and the first day or the first night of my job was in 2009 when I went to the water district and to comment on the EIR for the marina project at the time, restoration of the slough. The difference between the Guadalupe slough and other places where mitigation is possible is that we, up to Guadalupe, have a mercury mine. And so there is a lot of mercury in those sediments. And the reason it was not permitted, unlike many, many other similar places, is because of the mercury, because the dredging of the mercury had, one, it would be released into the bay, and that was a big concern, and B, any dredge had to go to a toxic waste dump, so it's expensive. So it's not like other projects. I often prefer to see no project. Yeah, sure, this project is going to cause some damage to the environment, better not do it. But usually you can mitigate to some extent, and the agencies do go forward for that. I believe, like Eileen said, that this was not a political decision. That was an environmental decision, and it will be the same this time. If any dredging is offered, and the cost associated with dredging are also going to be much more than was estimated here. I would have loved to see a little, boat place there. I think it would be cool, but I don't think it's feasible. And more studies will come up with the same answer. It's not feasible. It's going to be, and that is because of historical mercury mining up the Guadalupe River more than anything else. And that is really important to remember. And maybe it's time to stop trying more and more studies that will try to say, oh, we don't need dredging. We do. You can't build it without it. Unfortunate, but I think it's true. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Roy Hayes. I'm with the South Bay Yacht Club. I have several points. The original proposal that came to you 3 years ago, or whenever it was, 2 years ago, did not include dredging. The dredging, I'm assuming, came into play in order for the county to get grant money from the state. But the original, or the requirement for dredging is there in order to get grant money from the state. But originally it was not part of the initial package. It was just, let's put some docks out in the slough where we get natural scouring, and the Mother Nature keeps the slough clean. A couple of quick points. When the county built the boat ramp, was the county concerned about boaters' experience in the slough? That seems to be a big point in this last report, that there's concern about people getting stuck out in the slough because of low tide. We built a boat ramp there, and people get stuck out there today. Not as much as they used to, because all you need to do is get stuck once and you don't do it again. You read the tide chart. Number two, the South Bay Yacht Club has 2 boats waiting right now for dock space. And if you build a dock, they will come. This is unsolicited, and they're asking us for dock space. We have a Sea Scout troop there that uses the docks. They're a kayak troop right now because we don't have a large boat for them to work on because we don't have a place to put it. Also, regarding the notch, it is working. If you go out there and look, you can see where it is scoured away. In the year that it's been open, it's taken a large amount of the bank space away that's there in the south, in the slough across from the yacht club. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to help with any further studies or activity that's going to be around this particular topic. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Supervisor Wasserman, that concludes the public speakers on the item, and I know you said you had some comments.
Thank you. I did. On package page 197, it has the comparison of scenarios, and it shows the 3 columns, the 12 million, the 21 million. The bottom row, middle column, where it says meets DBAW guidelines for access, and there's an X, 91% of days are impacted. I assume that's negatively impacted when you say impacted?
Yes.
Okay, and that, I don't know all these terms either. You've learned a great deal. I didn't have any basis at all to learn from until I was reading the report and been learning about this over the last year. So negatively impacted and not meeting guidelines on the first option, column 2. In column 3, where you have the check marks instead of the X's, 100% accessibility, I see the 21 million. I also read in the report the 1.7 million a year of ongoing. Was that ongoing basically for dredging?
Yes.
To maintain what is achieved via the 21 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
And just to go back to the first point that you made about the X's, both X's in
Yes.
the Department of Boating and Waterway guidelines, I just want to point out that this is for depth only. So what the gentleman just mentioned, theoretically, this, even if we were to dredge to the level that we've said would maybe work, negative 6.8 depth with a 50-foot width, it does not meet the guidelines that would enable us to seek grant money from Department of Boating and Waterways. Now, that's not to say that there wouldn't be other funding out there, but just to be clear, we
I'm
wouldn't
sorry,
be...
I need to interrupt you for a second. So you're talking about the negative 6.8, the third column over.
I'm talking about the second...
With the check marks.
I'm actually talking about the second from the bottom...
Okay, that's the 4-foot column.
row, the second from the bottom row all the way across.
Right here.
I want to point out that it says meets DBOG guidelines for channel depth.
Yes.
But to be clear, neither one of the things that we've looked at meets the guidelines for width. So we would not meet DBOG guidelines for width regardless of both of these scenarios. So we wouldn't...
So the $21 million estimate doesn't meet those guidelines? It
No.
would not make us eligible for federal grant
Not the DBA state funding guidelines. So again, they're just a guideline, so you'd have to probably approach them and say, we're not quite to the width that you would normally seek, which is 75 foot, we're only to 50 foot.
Okay,
because
so
we
you have a
can't go
check
wider.
mark there because it meets the depth.
Correct.
But not the width.
Right. I wanted to clarify that point.
Thank you for the clarification. I thought that check mark was one check covers all.
No,
But it doesn't.
sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you again for the presentation. Thank the public speakers for being here and the correspondence that we received. Again, my inclination, Supervisor, is to accept the follow-up report. I do think that the information needed for us to consider anything further here is here, and so we can accept it and then just take it under advisement from this point on. All right.
I would second that motion.
All right, so that's seconded, and so there's no dissent on it. We appreciate it. For those, I just want to say as a concluding comment, I think it's important for us to accept the report as what information we needed for today. And I don't know what future action I may advocate for, but I don't think it's the end of the discussion of the issue. I just want to make that clear to all parties present from my perspective. So.
And your motion, Supervisor, is we've accepted it here. It's not being advanced to the board at this time.
No,
Thank
it's just an accepted report. It'll be noted that the committee accepted the report in the committee report to the board, but we're not asking the board for any action.
Gotcha.
All right, thank you again. And I think that brings us to the end of our agenda, item 9 having been put on consent. So the adjournment is next, and we're adjourned to Thursday, December 20th, 2018 at 10 a.m. Supervisor Wasserman may lobby for that meeting to be redirected at some point, but in any case, whatever we do about December 20th will be publicly noticed. Thank you very much for being here.